Hello, good night. I'm Gary, and we're going to do a little programming stream. Um, I'm going to do some JavaScript. Maybe I should add it to the stream title. Uh, uh, JavaScript. Um, okay, so this stream is mostly dedicated for to teaching people how to start with programming. And the reason I'm using JavaScript is because I feel like there are two programming languages, maybe three. Um, let me. Okay, so there are two programming languages, maybe three that I consider um, simple. The two I can definitely say are beginner friendly are Python and JavaScript. And the third one is maybe Java, uh, but Java has certain uh, things that make it a bit more complicated. So for me, it was between JavaScript and Python. And the reason I don't do Python is there are two reasons. First, I'm not really experienced with Python. I'm mostly a JavaScript and a PHP programmer, mostly because of work. But also, um, JavaScript is one of those languages where you don't need a lot. The only thing you need are an IDE, and it could even be just Notepad and a browser. Um, so first, let's go to the programming scene. Okay. So what I have now is okay. So why is this double? Oh, it's okay. The dev console is above everything. So what I have here is we have the JavaScript coding. No, this is Visual Studio Code. Visual Studio Code is an IDE or well, it's a I believe it stands for Integrated Development Environment. Um, okay, let me look it up. Yeah, Integrated Development Environment. And what an IDE does is it makes it easier for you to essentially code. The reason people use an IDE is for numerous reasons. You can group many files together. Um, you have excellent debug tools. It even has a JavaScript debugging tool. You can run the console for when you do other types of programming like JavaScript or well JavaScript through Node.js or PHP. This is a console or the terminal. I use Git Bash, but the terminal isn't really that important for today. Today I want to do the basics of programming. So let's remove this and save this. Um, so what I have here is a basic project. I only have one file named index.js, the index.html. What I also have is a live preview screen or panel. The live preview panel, you can download it as an extension right here. It's called Live Preview. It's from Microsoft. Um, and it allows you to live preview your current project. Okay, so if I type in, today we're going to learn a bit of JavaScript. Then you can see that this window automatically updates. So that's handy. You don't have to install Visual Studio Code, like I said. You can just use Notepad. IDEs just make it a lot easier to develop your application. So let me start by creating a new folder. Let's call it 01 or 001 beginning, or the first project. First project. So what I'm doing is I'm going to copy this index.html, remove the title, and we call it 001 first project. This isn't really necessary, but I just want to start off with something simple. So what I'm going to do now is show preview, and we now begin with an empty project. So what does this have to do with JavaScript? Well, technically nothing, because right now we're just using HTML, but we can use JavaScript within an HTML document. So let's begin with a script tag, and you don't have to include this entire piece of HTML code. You can also just use this, but this is more for myself. So let's save it, and nothing happens. Well, that's correct. Nothing actually happens. So let me open this console. This console, let's make it a bit smaller, because I want to make it bigger here. So now this gets a bit zoomed in. Let me try and zoom, increase this size. How can I increase the font size? Let's do font zoom in. So okay. Okay. So why do I want to zoom in? Oh, control. Oh, okay. Control 0. Wait. Zoom reset. Okay, so hopefully this is a bit more. I thought I was going to sneeze, but okay. So what we're going to do now is write a piece of code. So let's do console log and hello world. And as you can see, this console window, and I need to move chat just a little. I'm going to move chat over here. So what? Okay, I can see that this is going to be a small problem. So if I just make it a bit wider and do this. Okay, so now you can see hello world. Every time I type something in, the console also updates. So normally it's not a problem, because your web page doesn't automatically reload every time you type something in. This is just for the preview, but it's something you need to watch out for. If you're developing something like a game, you have to make sure that that it doesn't spam everything. So let's see what happens if I do const x is 1 and x. Okay, so the thing is, it does completely reload. So it's not really a problem. If every time you type in, it just reloads the page, and it doesn't retain previous variables. Oh, okay, yeah. So as you can see, console log is a handy tool to see if your code works, but also to see if certain things work as intended and to see where things go wrong. There are also other console methods. I call them methods. Some people call them functions, but technically they're called methods. I believe error is one. And when you use arrow, it shows an error. It shows the console message as an error. So let's start. Let's go with log, and we can let's just keep it now. Technically, this is already a program or a script, but it's not really interesting. So what else can we do? Well, since this is a programming language, you can also do computation. So let's say do console log and then 1. But 1 on its own isn't really that interesting. So let's do 1 plus 2. And the output is, as expected, 3. Yeah. So you can also do simple computations. So that's cool. But how can we turn it into an actual application? Well, we have this thing called a variable. A variable is, let's say, something that changes. That's actually literally what a variable means. It's something that constantly changes, and that thing that changes is represented by a word. For example, we have a word called window. Window in itself is technically not it is a variable. It's a variable that contains a window object. And what is this window object? The window object is technically just this entire screen. By the way, if you have questions, you can also always ask them in the chat, and I'll try my best to answer them. So window is a variable. What's also a variable? Technically, math. Math is technically not a variable, but you can use it in variables. You can store math is an object that you can store in a variable. So let's start with making a variable. We begin with the keyword. Okay, so when I typed window and I hover on over this, we can see here var window. We can use var variable, and this is a variable. The problem is the problem with var is while it's still in use, it is a bit too loose, and I'll maybe I'll explain it later or on another stream, but let's just say that we generally never use var, because var it's not necessarily unsafe, but it makes it harder for developers to know uh, what the intent is of this variable. What we can use is const, and let's say constant value is 1, and we can have let, and it is a variable value is 2. Now, what's the difference between const and let? Well, okay, maybe I can do console clear. So what console clear does is it clears up the console. So let's say I'll change a variable value to 3. That's still possible, but if I do constant value is 3, the console is going to throw out an error. Why? Because constant value has to be constant. That's what the const means. It means that the variable is a constant. It never changes. You initialize it once, and then you can never change it ever again. Let instead lets you change the variable. So first, the variable is log variable value. So now we can see that the output value is 2, and here we can see that the output value is 3. So what have we learned now? We have learned that there are 2 different types of variables. We have a constant variable, and we have a variable that can change, changeable variable or mutable variable. So let's see what we can do with variables. For the rest of well, not for the maybe not for the rest of this entire stream, but at least for now, we'll stick with let. So let's begin with let number 1, and number 1 is 1. Let number 2 is a 2. Well, that doesn't seem too exciting, but let's say we want to set number 2 as the same number as number 1. So let's say number 1 is 1 times 3, and we want to make sure that number 2 is also number 1. We can then do 1 times 3 here, or what we also can do is number 1. So that if we do it console log number 1, we can see that the value is 3, and if we do number 2, we can see that the level is also 3. So, but what we can what we've done now is so far we've put several console logs below each other, which is fine, but eventually it can get cluttered if you just copy this and put it 2. And you can see with the console it places them next to below each other. So first number 1 and then number 2. Or is it actually number 1 and number 2? We don't know because in an asynchronous function or whatever, whenever you perform actions that are not sequential but can run at different speeds, you'll never be sure which of the two numbers is which. So what we can do here to make it clear is say number 1 is, and a comma, and you can see now number 1 is now being labeled. And we can do the same for number 2. Now, what does this mean? This also means that we can do this. Number 1 is 3, number 2 is 3. So we can actually put numbers next to each other in the console log. This makes it easier to see what number is which, and you don't have to label it, but the label is handy if you want to properly debug your code. Okay, so now we know that you can set the number, we can change the number, and we can use another variable to set the variable. So far, everything clear? I hope it's clear so far. So let's go on with something a bit more tricky. We'll keep this as number. We make another variable called text. And the text is hello world. Now, let unknown variable. And the unknown variable is number plus text. So what do you think the output will be? Well, let's see with the console log and unknown variable. Let's save, and you can see that the output is 1 hello world. So what we see here is that we can combine a number and a text, and it becomes just another text. Well, can we combine two texts? Yes. Let's call this text, and let's call this text 2, and let's call this text yo, and text, and text 2. And you can see here that it combines the two strings. So combining two strings is what we generally call concatenating. So we concatenated two strings together. But as you can see, if we use 1, the number 1, let's return this to number. We use text here. It combines the two texts. But what if we make this a string number 2? Well, then we get 12. So what we basically get is 1 plus 2 equals 12. So that doesn't really seem right? Well, that's something you need to be careful of, because sometimes a number can be returned as a string. For example, when you use an input box. So let's say an input. This isn't really necessary, but it's a force of habit. So, and if you type in this, you don't really know if this is a string or a number, and most of the time it is a string. So you need to find a way to turn this text into a number. So how can you do it? Well, there are several ways. I believe that there is a parseInt function. And what does parseInt do? It parses a a piece of text into a number. So it changes a string. This is what we call a string because it's a string of characters. So let's say A, B, C, D, E. This is a string of characters. So we call a bit of text, we call that a string. So let's return it to 2. With parseInt, we can actually turn this text, this string, into a number. But what if we say F, and we want F to be interpreted as an hexadecimal F. So we want, I believe, 15 plus 1 must equal 60. So what we do, we add a base here. So right now it's in base 10, and that's not really correct. So so we changed the 10 into 16. And this is something you don't really need to remember, but just remember that parseInt exists to make it easier to parse a string into a number. Okay, but so let's go back. What if we just have a 2? We can just use parseInt. There's another way to convert a string into a number, and that is text and times 1. And that way we can also wait, let me text. That's also how we can convert a text to a number, an integer to no. That's how we can convert a string into a number. So we can just multiply it by 1. However, this isn't really practical because we need to wrap it in brackets. We do need to wrap it. So what can we do to make it easier? We can just use plus plus and text. It's a simple trick to oh no, not plus plus, just 1 plus. And what it does is it just converts the text into a numeral, a number value. So if we do 2.5, it automatically turns it to 2.5 a number. Why do I personally use this? Well, if we do parseInt, we suddenly get the wrong value because 1 plus 2.5 isn't 3, it's 3.5. And parseInt turns it into a integer or a whole number. And that's why I just use this, because it just makes it easier for me to convert it into a number. So let's also do it here. Number. Okay. So now we can see. Okay, this string doesn't look that great. Okay, but what we can now see is that we can convert a string into a number. Okay, but what we also seen is what if we put an x in the number? Well, then you get NaN, or not a number. Not NaN means well, like I said, not a number. It means that the output isn't a valid number, and therefore it always has to error. And I'm going to show you a trick later with NaN when we do comparators. So hopefully so far it's not too difficult. So let's get rid of this and do text. We're going to do a few things with text. So let's say we have a piece of text. This is a piece of text. This is a piece of text in a new line. Okay, so we have a piece of text and we have a piece of text that's supposed to be on a new line. Problem is, it's not on a new line. So how do we do it? Well, we can use this. This is just a new line character. It uses a backslash and an N. That stands for new line. At least I think it does. So that's something that you can use. So yeah, that's pretty simple. So this is how you can do a new line. So, but what are other things you can do? Well, let's say we have a piece of text, and you can use single quotes. You can also use double quotes. Why do we use double quotes? Let's say we type "it's a new world," and we can see here a single quote. If we used single quotes, then suddenly there'd be an issue. You can see here unexpected and the identifier S, and that's because it doesn't know what S means. What happens is it becomes a single string because it has an opening tag and it has a closing tag. And the way most people solve this is by wrapping it in a different type of quoting, like this. And now we don't have this issue. But what if we have something else like Gary looked up in the sky and said, "It's a new world." Well, then we have a problem. We have one double quote, we have another double quote. So this entire string is supposed to be wrapped in double quotes, but then we have another double quote, and this shouldn't end this this quote or this string. It should be part of the string. But we also can't use single quotes because we have a single quote here. So how do we solve it? Well, remember the new line sign I used? So the backslash and the N? Well, the backslash also functions as an escape character. An escape character essentially escapes whatever it's originally doing. So in this case, it makes sure that this double quote does not get interpreted as a closing tag. It escapes that label. And so now we can use the double quotes within a string. And it also works the other way around. So let's use this and remove the double quotes here. So the reason I personally always use single quotes for strings is first of all Airbnb. Airbnb is it is the service for to stay overnight and such, but they also, if I'm correct, they also have a certain rule set for their code, which is used in ESLint. ESLint is a linter. It's not important what it is. You don't have to remember what ESLint is, but essentially ESLint ensures that code remains consistent over the entire development process. More often than not, as a programmer, you are involved with other people. Other people will work on your code as well. Same goes for if you program on GitHub in a group, or you want to commit something to a certain repo. You have to follow certain rule sets, and ESLint helps you with staying consistent. For example, things like using single quotes instead of double quotes. But overall, it's not really that important to know why I use single quotes. You can use double quotes if you want. That's not a problem. But anyway, this is what the escape character is for. So let's go through everything we've gone through so far. We know the difference between const and let, because const can be changed, and let can be changed. Variable is free. By the way, two slashes after each other means that it is a comment, and a comment is not part of your code. It is mainly used to document your code, to make sure your code is clear for those who don't work on your code. I have to be honest, I personally often do forget to add comments to my code. That's a me problem. I should do it more often, because yeah, I don't solely work on my code. There are other people who also work on code. Wait, let me check first. Um, uh, so yeah, okay, so never mind. So what I'm going to do is next. What have we also done? We know how to make how to use numbers. Let number 1 is 1. That's just a regular number. Let number 2 is a string, and we know how to convert from a string to a number. And we now know how to actually use a string. So yeah. So next, let's work a bit more with numbers. We now have number 1, number 2, and let's see. Const result is number 1 plus number 2, and then let's copy result and save it. Okay, we can now see that we've added two numbers to each other, and let's just make it a regular number, make it more clear. So now we've done 1 plus 2 is 3. So what can we also do with numbers? Well, we can, of course, subtract. So 1 minus 2 equals minus 1. Okay, so let me show you one more thing. This is also a string, but it's a special kind of string. It allows you to insert variables within its string. So number 1 minus number 2 equals, and now we can see both numbers are now in a string itself. You don't have to remember this, but this is more to show you more easily the results. So as you can see, if we use minus, obviously the result is -1. So we know plus adds two numbers, minus subtracts one number from the other. So an asterisk multiplies the number. So 1 times 2 is 2. If we do 2 times 2, it's 4. 2 times 3 is 6. And 3 times 3 is 9. With an asterisk, we can multiply two numbers with each other. Finally, we have division. So with a slash, we can divide one number with another number. So in this case, 1 divided by 2 is 0.5 or a half. Now, so we can also use parentheses to group numbers. So let's do this, number 2, and then let number 3 is 3. Number 2 times 3 is number 3. And now we can see that number 1 is divided by number 2 times number 3, or number 1 is divided by 6. So we can use parentheses to group numbers, just like regular mathematics. Let's remove rest to just show results, because we're going to do more advanced things with it. Okay, so we've now done this. We've shown several different methods to work with numbers, so we call this an operator. An operator can modify a number, can make sure a number gets bigger, gets smaller, gets subtracted, that sort of thing. There are also some simpler modifiers. So let's take a look. We have number 1. We're going to copy this one. So what are we going to do? We'll do number 1 is number plus 1. Well, number 1 plus 1. And we can see that, of course, number 1 gets increased by 1. That it seems logical, because we said we already have the value of number 1, which is 1, plus 1 is 2. But we can also simplify it. We don't always need to add number 1 is and then the rest. Especially if we also do number 2, for example. So how can we simplify this? Well, we remove this. And now it becomes 2, which isn't correct. We want it to be 1 plus 2. So we can add plus here. Now we can see number 1 plus 2 is number 1. That's what this basically means number 1 is number 1 plus number 2. Okay. Can I do it with other operators? Of course. I can do minus, I can do divided by, and I can do multiply by. Okay, so let's go back to number 1 plus 1. This is oftentimes sufficient, and Airbnb, something you can't forget, prefers this over other methods. But I'm still going to show you another method to increase a number. Two pluses. Two pluses means increase the current number by 1. Yeah. It now increases this number by 1. So if I do another plus plus, instead of 2, it becomes 3, 4, 5, and 6. So that's also a method to increase a number. And now I'm using even less characters. So is there something else I can do with this? Well, of course. But let's first do something a bit more drastic. Instead of after, you put it before it. And we can see that it does exactly the same, right? Increases the number by 1, and by 1, and by 1. And this is not something you need to know because it doesn't get used that often, but it's nice to know that it exists. So let's say const number 4. And let's look at number 4. Well, we can see that number 4 is 1. But why? Because number 1 should be 2, right? But is it suddenly 1? Well, let's see. No, number 1 is still 2. So what does that plus plus at the end mean? Well, it means that number 4 becomes what number 1 is right now. And after we've done that, we increase number 1 by 1. And yeah, that's what it does. But can we do it the other way around? We want number 4 to be number 1 after it has increased by 1. Well, of course, if we place it before it, number 4 becomes 2, and number 1 also it has become 2. And because number 4 is a const, we can't change it again. So let's see what happens if we do number 1 plus plus. Number 1 is now 3, and number 4 stays 2, even if we place it before. So yeah, this also shows that number 4, a constant, is unchanging. Okay, so far we've handled operators that change a value. But let's say we have 2 variables. Let number 1 be 5 or 4, and let number 2 be 4. So what I want to do is check if number 1 is equal to number 2. So let's do console log number 1 is number 2. Oh, wait, it doesn't work. So what happened? Well, instead of checking if the 2 numbers are equal, we set the value of number 1 to number 2. So let's say we do 6, then the result is 6. But we want to check if the 2 numbers are equal. So what do? We, instead of 1 equal sign, we use 2 equal signs. And now we can see that the value now becomes true. So yeah, with 2 equal signs, we can now check if 2 variables are equal to each other. So let's say if number 2 was 2, then it is false. And if number 2 is 4, then it's true. And if number 2 is a string, it should be false, right? Well, no. Why? because what it does now is it checks if 4 is similar to number 2, but it doesn't mean it has to be exactly equal to each other. They are both 4, um, uh, and that's regardless of whether 1 is a string or not. So how do we make sure that number 1 and number 2 are the number 4, and that neither is a string, or that either both are a string or neither are a string? Well, we do this by adding an extra s, equal sign. 3 equal signs means it has to be exactly the same. So now we can see that number 1 and number 2 aren't the same. And in this case, they are the same. Okay, but how do you check if both numbers are not equal to each other? Well, we can use an exclamation mark, and we can see 4 isn't exactly equal to number 2. What if we don't care about whether 1 is a string or not? Well, then we can use single equal sign. Okay, so let's go on. What else do we have? Well, of course we have bigger than signs and smaller than signs. So number 1 obviously isn't bigger than number 2. It's bigger than or equal to number 2. So if we do an equal sign, it becomes true. Well, can we use an extra is? Well, of course not, because you can only do this with numbers, if I recall correctly. I might be wrong. Let's see. Let's check if it actually works. 5 is true and 1 is false. And we can do the same with smaller than signs. So this 5 is true, 3 is false, and smaller than or equal, that also works. Okay, so what can we do now? So what we've learned is we can add 2 numbers, we can subtract 2 numbers, multiply, divide numbers, and we can also easily increase one number by using the double plus sign. And we can also do the same with minus, by the way. What we can't do is use 2 asterisks, because that just doesn't work. But we can use asterisk equals 2, and then we can multiply this variable by 4. Okay, so this is basically the basics of variables. So let's do something cool with variables. Let's say we want to check if these 2 variables are equal, and if they're equal, we want to show a text, let's say the same. So console log same. Now what we can do is we can wrap it in an if block. Do number 1, number 2, and we can see that once they're the same, this text pops up, and if they're not the same, the text disappears. So can we also do it with a stored variable? Of course. So let's do let result is number 1 equals number 2, Actually, I actually do like to use three equal to signs because it ensures that both are exactly the same. So if we do result, then it's true. And if I do 5, then the message doesn't pop up. I can also just say true and say the value is true. And we can use false. And so what we see here is that we can set the values true and false to a variable. Now, what are true and false? True and false are both what we call Boolean values. So result becomes a Boolean. And you can see it with my tooltip that indeed each has a certain type of value. In this case, result has become a Boolean. Okay, but what if for some reason I want to do 1? Well, it also works. 2, 3, yeah. So let's go back down. So 2 is still true, 1 is still 1, but 0 is suddenly is not true. What about -1? Well, -1 is still true. So what can we learn from this? Well, we can learn that there are not just true and false values, but we also have truthy and falsy values. A truthy value is a value that isn't true, but acts like it is true. And a falsy value is a value that isn't false, but acts like it is false. And this is where the equal sign are pretty handy. If you do triple S, triple equals 2, and do false, then it doesn't trigger. But if we explicitly say false, then it triggers. So this is essentially how booleans work and how truthy and falsy works. So now that we're talking about truthy and falsy, are there other truthy and falsy values? Well, of course, there's also string is a truthy value, unless it's an empty string. The moment it's an empty string, and a string without text, it becomes falsy. Another falsy value is null. Null is basically means it's an empty value. Might not entirely be true, but it's considered an empty value. It's equal to 0. Almost. If I do plus. Okay, that's not going to show anything, but null is a falsy value. That's what you need to know. And null has other properties that can be used in other bits of code, which I maybe discuss on another stream, because that's more advanced. And I want to give you the basics. So variables, and if blocks, and maybe for loops even. Okay, so we also have undefined. Undefined is also a falsy value. And from everything we've discussed, I believe not a number is also a falsy value. So let's see. So if we do number 1 equals number 2, and the value is true. Let's say we do both we do false, and this is also false. Well, because both are false, the end result, of course, is true. But if we do null and null, both values are equal to each other, then yeah, of course it's gonna be true. Undefined. The same goes for undefined. This is also true. Now let's take a look at another number, and of course we'll expect that it's going to be a true value. But, and this is one of the weird quirks. On one hand, on the other hand, it has there's a reason for this. So now the number is never equal to itself. Why not? Well, I believe the reason is that not a number is the only value in JavaScript that never is equal to another value. And why is that? Well, let's say you have A, and you also have A, and we do result again. Okay, these two values are equal, right? But if we change one to B, then these two aren't equal. So the logical conclusion should always be that if we turn both of them into another number, they should still not be equal to each other. And that's the reason why not a number is never equal to itself. Because not a number can be any value that is not a number. So let's go to the next part. So what we already have done is concatenation. We done the number operators. Okay. What should we do? We also have done the if blocks. Well, let's do let's get rid of these and just set true here, because we know how to compare true values with each other. Okay, but let's say we have two results. Left result 1 is true and result 2 is true. So what we want is, we want both results to be true. So how do we do it? There is a special operator. It's like result 2. When you use two ampersands, it counts as AND. It's an AND operator. So it compares. So it checks if this value is true and this value is true. So both values have to be true. And you can see that there is an output here. However, if I do false here, then the total result is false, because this is true, but this one isn't true. And since both need to be true, the result is of course false. But what if we wanted that so that value 1 has to be true, or value 2 has to be true, one of the two or both. So let's see. This is an OR operator. It checks whether one or the other value is true. And it doesn't matter which one is true or if they're both true. As long as one of the two is true, it is true. The moment both are false, the result is also false. So let's check if this works. This doesn't work. Okay, so we have both an and an or. So we have and. Some programming languages allow the keywords and or. So we have and we have or. Can we combine them? Most certainly. We can combine them. We can use let result 3 is false. We do or result 3. And we can combine the and operators with each other. We can also mix them, but the main problem is how does it work? So let's do this. It's really ambiguous. So apparently, first these two are compared with an and then this will be compared with an or. So since both are true, of course the value is going to be true. So if I do false, it's going to be false, and if I use true, it's going to be true. But this is a bit confusing. So what's often recommended is that you group each different type of operator in one group, in a one parentheses group, so that it becomes more clear. Okay, so let's start by removing this and use result 1. So what we've done is we've used operators to combine two booleans to check if two booleans are either both true or one is true and one is not true. So yeah, but what if we wanted to do something with this? This value is true, but we also want to show a message when that value isn't true. We can do console log the value is false. But right now we can see that both messages are displayed. If this is false, then only this message is shown, but we don't want both messages to appear when this is true. We only want this message to appear. So what can we do? We can use else block. An else block always accompanies an if block. So now we can see, since this value is true, the true message is displayed. But if we do use false, then a false message is displayed. Okay. So, but now what we want is, if result 1 is false, then we want to check if result 2 is true or false. So we can do this: if result 2 else console log the other value is true, and this has to be neither is true. So we can see that this can also work. So if we do false, then we can see that this message is shown. Okay, this works, except it kind of looks messy, and if you have more than two if blocks, it becomes a nesting hell. So we nest this if block inside this else block, and then we can continue this until the end of time. But we don't want to do that. We just want it to be more clear. So what we're doing is we're deleting this, And this is also possible now. We have an if block. If result 1 is true, then this block is shown. Otherwise, if this value is true, this message is shown. And in neither, if it's neither case, we'll go with this message. So let's check if it works. If we set true, indeed the first message is shown. And if we set this to true, then it doesn't matter because this message has already been shown. And yeah, this message doesn't get triggered because it's only triggered if this isn't true, regardless of whether this is true. But let's set this to false, and now we can see that this other value is true, and we also already know what happens if we use false. So that's how you use an if, else if, and else block. And same thing can be done with, let's remove everything. That number is 1. If number equals 1, so log hello, else if number is 2, so log yo, and else console log by. So now if we change this number to 2, we get yo, and 3 is by. That's nice and all, but it's not really efficient, and it doesn't look that great. So how do we fix this? How can we make this more clean? Now instead of an if block, we can also use switch. So let's do switch number case 1 console log hello, and let's break it. Case 2 console log yo, and default console log by. So let's check this out. If you change it to 2, we get yo. Change it to 3, we get by. Okay, now we see here that we forgot to close with break, which isn't a huge problem. It's best practice to add this break, but what if we forget it here, or we forget it here? Well, now we can see that all 3 messages are being triggered, which oftentimes isn't an intended feature. Well, it is an intended feature, but it isn't always the intent of the programmer to have it have each block be run consecutively. So we generally use break, and within the function we can also return from it. But in this case, break make sure that the switch block is being broken up, so that it doesn't bubble over to the next case block. And that's actually all you need to know about the switch the switch case blocks. There's more things you can do with switch case, but it's too. I feel like it's too advanced for what we're doing now. Okay, so what we've done is we've used if blocks. We've also used comparators, or well, operators and we have the AND operator and the OR operator. Um, and yeah, so there's one thing you also really need, and that's for loops. Say we want to have a console log 1, console log 2, maybe not in as a string, and we want to do it until the number 4 or number 3. We can use 3 console logs, but what we also can do is a for loop. So let's start a for loop. For. Okay, so what do we put in the for loop? First, you set the initial values. In this case, we do let value is 0. Then we'll compare. Then we do a comparison, and the easiest is just a value has to be smaller than 3. Finally, we do an operation on at the beginning of. Is it the beginning or the end? Yeah, I believe it's at the beginning of each loop. So we do value plus plus, or rather value plus is 1. So what this does is, let's see what it does. Maybe it's better to show than to tell. So what we see here, why doesn't it output? Let value is 1. Console log value. Console log. Okay. It seems like, oh crap. Okay, so something is happening. Okay. Okay. So it works again. So we can see now 0, 1, and 2. So what happens is at the start of the loop, we set of the start of the first loop, we set the value, variable value to 0. And then we run the loop once. This now value becomes oh, okay, I get it now. So value is now 0. At the end of the loop, we'll increase the value by 1. So let's so now the value is 1. It checks if value is smaller than 3. If that's the case, let's run the loop again, increase the value by 1. Now it's 2. Is 2 smaller than 3? Yeah. Then let's run the loop again. And now it's 3. And is 3 smaller than 3? No, so let's not run this loop anymore. So what does this mean? Okay, first, if we set this to 3, do you think the loop will start? Well, obviously it won't, because 3 is equal to 3. It's not smaller than 3. So let's return it to 0. And let's change it up a bit. Let's say let value. You can see that with let, we don't need to set a value because we can also always set it later. Unlike with const. Const has to always be set, because if you use const, then yeah, constant value has to be constant. Which also means that if it's undefined, which it can be, um, it can't be changed into a defined value. So that value is so why do we do this? Well, we want to use this value again after this loop. So if we do console log, we say result value, then we can see the result is 3, because as we said, uh, this piece of code always gets run at the end of the for loop, not at the beginning or whatever. At the end of the for loop, it's 3. Then it goes to the beginning and it checks whether it's it's only after this value is changed it checks if it's still uh, uh, meets this condition. So what have we learned so far? Um, we've learned const is a constant. Let is a variable is a variable, meaning that it can change. Const can change. Variables can change. We know the difference between a string, a number, and a boolean. We know how to compare booleans, and we know how to change the value of a number. Finally, we know how to do if blocks, for blocks, and switch blocks. So let's start with a small application, something that actually can be used for something. It's not really something you can use, but it's an actual project that you likely to get when you apply for a programming job, and that's FizzBuzz. We are going to do a simple implementation of FizzBuzz. So let's explain what FizzBuzz is. FizzBuzz, H1. So FizzBuzz is a game, a game where you count from 1 to a certain number, like 15. When you get a number that's divisible by 3, you say fizz. When it's divisible by 5, you say buzz. If it's both, you say fizz buzz. Okay, so there's there's a few things we need to do. First, we need to do a for loop. So how do we start this? Let's start by using for, and then let I or number, I just use I, be 1. I has to be smaller than or equal to 15, and I increases by 1. I'm using this now because it's simple. I can also use plus equals 1, and that does the same. So first of all, each number needs to be iterated. Let's do console log I, and now we can see the numbers 1 to 15, but this doesn't meet our conditions. So what do we do? If I equals 3, console log fizz, else if I equals 5, console log buzz, else, and now we can check. It doesn't seem to work. Oh, it does work. 1, 2, fizz, 4, buzz, but it doesn't continue this series. So what we can do is we can add more else ifs, but that's a bit tiresome. So let's do switch instead. Switch I case 3 case. So we can use multiple case blocks. Case 9, case 12, and then console log fizz break, case 5, case 10, console log buzz break, and otherwise default console log I. Okay, it almost works. We forgot one thing, namely the fizz buzz. So case 15, console log fizz buzz break. So we've now made a working fizz buzz. So that's cool, right? Well, it may be cool, but what if we want to do 1 to 100? So const max is 100. Then we need to do this all again. We need to copy it over, and it'll take a long time to do this. So let's just ditch this switch block. So isn't there an operator that allows us to check whether a number is divisible by 3 or divisible by 5? Well, there are several methods. So let's start with a console log. Let's say we have a constant number is 3, and we do number has to be equal to math number, right? Math floor number divisible by 3, and then so if we do this divisible divided by 3, then we can see that it's true. If it's 2, it's false. 1, 6, true. 7, 8, 9. So we can use the math function. This is the math floor function. And what floor does is it rounds a number down. So number divided by 3. Let's see what number divided by 3 is. Instead of a, let's see, we do comma. So we see 3 and we do 1. We can see that a number divided by 3 is 0.3333333, and math floor is just 0 because we're rounding down. If we want to round up, which also is possible, we can use ceil. And if we wanted to round it to the nearest number, we can do round. And in this case, it's 0, but if we use 2, it's 1. Okay, we can do this, but there is an easier way to do this. It's called the modulo. The modulo is done with percentage. And what does modulo do? It divides the number by the number defined here, in this case 3, and takes the remainder. So if we do 3, since 3 is divided by 3, there's no remainder. But 4 is is isn't divisible by 3. It's just 1 times 3 plus 1. So that's what the modulo does. How can we use it? We can use it with this. If I 3 equals 0, so there's no remainder, then we do console log phys. Else if I 5, console log bus, and else console log phys bus. Oh, no, not phys bus. We need to do I. And let's set it back to 15 max. This is 15. Okay, so for the most part, it works. 1, 2, phys, 4, bus, phys, 7, 8, phys, bus, 11, phys, 13, 14, phys. But this isn't correct. It has to be phys bus. So we have to add if I modulo 3 is 0 and I modulo 5 is 0, then console log is bus, else if, and then we get the right value. So 15 is phys bus. So this is how you can implement phys bus easily. However, we can make it even simpler. What we can do is let's output is an empty string. Let's delete the rest. If I modulo 3 equals 0, output plus is phys. So what does plus is do? Just like we saw earlier, it does this plus this, and it sets it back to this variable. So output is output plus phys technically. So if we do this now, I modulo 5, 0, output plus is bus. If output, so what does did this thing again? If output is a truthy value, so this isn't a truthy value, it's a falsy value. But if it's truthy, log output. Otherwise, so log I. And if we check now, we can indeed see 1, 2 phys, 4 bus phys, 7, 8 phys, bus 11 phys, 13, 14 phys bus. So now we've combined our knowledge about if blocks, for blocks, string concatenation, and a lot of other things. And this is actually basically the basis you can use for your programming. Is there so now that we're done, are there any questions about this? I'm I'm going to take a drink first, and then I'll be right back. Okay, so I'm back. I can see that there are no questions. Hopefully that's because either you just enjoy my voice or ooh, getting up the stairs is a bit tiring. um, so yeah, this is basically the start of programming actually. So what I can do is go one step further. Um, and honestly, I might just do that. So let's save this and let's go on to a new project. Right. New file. Let's call this arrays. So let's take this code. And like I said earlier, you don't need the entire HTML block. So let's put it here. And then okay, let's go here. Let's clear this part out. And let's go here. Showing preview. So let's go with const. Well, let's do a const. No, not let var1 is 1. Let var2 is var1. Console log var1 var2. If I now change var1 is 3, then you can see that var2 doesn't change, var1 also doesn't change. That's because these values, yeah, you change the variable itself. But let's say we do something new. Let's create this. This is called an array. What can you do with an array? You can add 1, 2, 3, 4. An array is basically just a list of items you can store in. And you can always remove an item, add items, and you can even do this on the fly. So what we're now seeing is that we've shown the output of both variables, and they're both the same array, right? Yeah, that's correct. So what if we just want to get the number 3? Well, we can use square brackets for that, and in square brackets we'll use the index of the item we want to fetch. The index is basically the position where the item is. So we can see that 3 is at the 3rd position. So we will type 3, right? Well, not exactly. When we type 3, we'll get the number 4, which isn't ideal. So what's happening here? Well, arrays are 0 indexed. That means the first value has the index number of 0. If we do 0, we get number 1. use 2, we get 3. This also means that we can change individual numbers. So let's do this and do var1 2 is 5. And we can see 1, 2, 5, 4, 3. And if we add var2, then obviously var2 will contain the original array 1, 2, 3, 4, right? Well, no. The thing with arrays is arrays are assigned by reference. So var2 doesn't make a copy of var1, it just takes the original reference of var1. What I mean by this is it's literally the same object. Let me take out another application where I can properly explain it. Let's add window capture paint. MS Paint is cool. And we place it here below chat. So okay, let's see brush. This is brush. You have var1 and that one has array. You have var2. Let's see, var2 it becomes var1, but technically it is exactly this array. Because this is set in a certain position in memory, and var2 just takes the memory address of this array. So yeah, that's how it works. It's there are two different kind of types that do this. Those are arrays and objects. I'm not going to discuss objects now. Maybe in a next stream, because variables are already hard enough. And I also want to do a bit of DOM. So yeah, it's quite needed that I only do variables or arrays. So what you can basically see is that var2 references the array on var1. But what if we set var1 to null? Well, that doesn't mean that the array suddenly doesn't have a reference anymore. var2 just keeps reference to that array. So that's basically how an array, assigning arrays to variables work. They work by reference. So let's say we have a var2 1, 2, 3, 4, and we do var2, then we get false. Even with this, we get false. But if we just assign it var1, then we get true. Is there a way to check if two arrays are similar? Their contents are similar? Yeah, there are ways, but I'm not going to discuss them now because that requires me to look it up myself, because I never really needed it. but it is possible, and it probably requires you to iterate through the entire array. Um, but yeah, it must be possible. It is possible, but it's not really that simple. Now, let's go to the next thing. What if we want to know the length of the array? Well, it's simple. We can just do a dot and then length. And we can see that it's now length 4. If we had a 5, then it becomes 5. We had several more items or two records. And now there are 11 items. Let's remove those items. And what can you do with it? Well, it's simple. You can just do a for loop. I is 0, I smaller than var1 dot length, and I plus is 1. So next we're going to do console log var1 I, and you can see that it iterates through the entire array and prints it out. So that's a simple way of iterating through an array. However, there's an even simpler way. It's not. It's something that is often used, but both the for loop and the other loop I'm going to discuss have their own uses. So let's look at for each. var1 as var3, I believe. No, this is PHP. I forgot that this is PHP. Okay, so there is another way. I'm going to show it quickly, but we're going to discuss it later. So var1.for each, and we're going to use a function within this, and item, and do console log item. But I'm not going. Basically, what this is the for each is a method of this array. What it does is it goes through each item and then executes a certain function, but it's not that important, I think. What you can even do is just this, and it does almost the same. Well, not really. You can see that there is a difference. You can see the item, the index, and the original array. So for each, you can use item, index, and original, and we can get basically the same original. And this is the same output as item, as what we've seen before. But this isn't really important because this is more advanced, and this requires you to know what functions are. And arrays themselves are already pretty what did you say? They're pretty expansive. There are a lot of things you need to know about arrays. So let's do console log var1. Next, var1 dot so let's say we want to add a new item at the end of var1. Now what we can do is var1, and we know how many items there are. 1, 2, 3, 4, and we want to add 1 at the end. So it's at index 4. So 1 one is 0, 0, 1, 2, 3. And we want to add high. And we can see that you can mix two different variable types. These are numbers, and this is a string. But using this is simple when you know beforehand what the length of this array is. But if you always want to add one at the end, you need to do var1 dot length. So if I copy this, it adds a new high at the end, and that's not really a problem. But there is a method that makes this a bit easier, and that is var1 dot push high. And as you can see, it does the same thing. It adds an item at the end of the array. But if you want to do this, but if instead you want to add one at the beginning, you'll have to use a different method called unshift. So this is how you can add an item at the end or at the beginning. So end start, and let's change this to push. Okay, but now so log var1. Now we want to remove those two items again. How do I do that? Well, we have the opposites of push and unshift called var1 pop, and pop takes one item at the end. var1 shift take one from the beginning. So now you can see that start and end are removed, and I can repeat this process again to take one off the beginning again. So that's what pop and shift do. Pop and shift. Pop pops an item at the end. Shift shifts one from the beginning, and the opposite push pushes one at the end, and unshifts one at the beginning. So I can even visualize it. Oh wait. Oh wait. Okay. That's not great. Okay, so yeah, that's better. So how do I visualize this? So push and pop. Push and pop. Push can be seen as you have a stack of plates, and you push a plate at the top. It's like those plates you can find at those all-you-can-eat restaurants, where you can take one plate at off the top. That's when you pop. This is when you pop. This is pop. And when you add one, you push a plate on top of the stack. Pop and push are both often used when used in a stack. There's a data structure called stack, if I recall correctly. So, and shift unshift does the opposite. It shifts one from the end or from the beginning. I don't know how to visualize it, but I hope you I hope it is clear enough for you guys. So that's push and pop and unshift and shift. What next? Well, let's say you want to add something in the middle. And let's remove. Don't remove the rest. So let's say we want to add something in the center, in between 2 and 3. Well, var 1, and then we can do splice. And as you can see with this with this pop-up, it also says what it does, what each argument does exactly. So the start number is 0, 1, and we want to add something at index 2. So we use 2. How many do we want to delete? We don't want to delete anything. And we want to add middle. And as we can see, it adds middle exactly at the middle. Okay, so let's just get rid of it again. It's at index 2, and we want to remove 1. And yeah, it's gone now. Okay, so what use does splice have actually? And same goes for pop and shift. Well, there's another feature for each for these 3 things. So if you do const var pop is and const var shift, we add var pop here, we add var shift here. Let's comment these out temporarily. And we can see that var pop has the value n, this value, and var shift has this value, start. So whenever you pop something off, you'll get that value as a variable. And the same goes for shift. Whatever you remove, you'll get back. So the same must be true for splice, right? Const var splice is, and then var splice. So return value has to be the string middle. Well, it's almost true. Instead, we get an array. So why do we get an array? Well, there's a good reason. What if we do 2 instead of 1? Then we get both middle and 3. And well, it's hard to return these 2 values without an array. So it's now returned as an array containing both middle and 3. So let's go back to 1 and let's continue. So now we have a problem. Well, it's not really a problem. Okay, first of all, can you add a value while splicing? Yeah, you can. So if we do center here, then we've replaced the middle with center. And you can even add center. So you can splice multiple values, and you can remove multiple values. So splice can both remove as well as add. And it can combine the both of them. But what if we want to have the two middle values, so 2 and 3, without actually removing them? Well, we can do this. Const var middle is var1 splice 1, 2, and now they're gone. And we can do var1 splice 1, 0, var middle 0, var middle 1. Yeah, but that's a bit of a hassle. So instead, we're going to, instead of using splice, we use slice. Slice just takes a slice of an array and doesn't do anything with the array itself. And we can see that, oh, well, we only get the value 2. So why is that? Well, slice works a bit differently than splice. Splice takes the length as the second argument. So in this case, it only takes one item. But in this case, it takes first argument is the start position, and the second argument is the end position. If you move it, it'll take everything from position 1. But if we do 1, then it's an empty array. Use 2, it's going to be from 1 to 2, but it doesn't include item 2. If we use 3, then we get the middle 2. So 1 and 2, but not 3. So that's actually what slice does. Well, that's nice, but can I also get just the first item? Well, of course. So let's do 1, 0, 1. That's the first item. And what about the last item? Well, that's also possible, and you can do that by using 3, and then we're done. But what if you don't know the exact length? Then what you can do is -1. When you use minus, it takes elements from the end. So if we do -2, it takes 3 and 4. And we can combine this by using 1, -2, or -1. And then we ignore the first item, we ignore the last item. But we take everything in between. So if we say 5, then we take 2, 5, 3. So basically what it does is just it starts with the first element, then it ends before the last element. It's a bit more complicated than what we've done so far, but well, it's, first of all, it's important to know that these functions exist and how they work. However, and this is something all programmers should know. No programmer knows everything about programming. Um, no programmer, no good programmer, no excellent programmer will learn everything and remember everything in their head. Um, Even the simplest things can still require documentation, references, all those things. There's no shame in using Google, in using Stack Overflow, in using W3 Schools or Mozilla's development center. Just you have the internet. Uh, you have manuals. Back in the days back in the days of things like QBasic and such, we never really learned each and every function. We just remembered these functions exist, looked them up in the built-in help file, or yeah, not really help file, but um, the built-in reference document, and from there we just look up what each value did. Uh, so if you don't know how splice works or how slice works, um, you can always just hover over it and see what it does. Sometimes, if it's your own code, you can control click it. Use any tool you can use, but and this is also important. You need to have a basis when programming. There are a lot of new programmers that uh, use ChatGTP or uh, uh, Copilot or Tab9. And I'm not saying that using those tools is bad. In fact, they're not exactly bad. The problem is when you actually learn using AI instead of learning to code, learning to program. Actually learning how to program gives you a basis for uh, coding. If you don't know what you're doing, no amount of ChatGTP or Copilot or whatever will help you debug your code. Um, because no AI is perfect. AI is only as perfect as humans are, and they still need to be trained with data that can also be outdated within a month. Look at JavaScript. The JavaScript from now is different from that of 5 years ago. Um, 5 years ago, we were only at the beginning of ES6. And we now have things like observers, generator functions, asynchronous functions, all those things that didn't exist before, I don't know, 2015, I guess. Um, and they keep adding onto uh, JavaScript. So having a basis in programming is important. So, um, but yeah, that's a small rant of mine. Um, so let's just go to the most important things you do need to remember are push and unshift, and pop and shift. Mainly pop and shift, or actually just pop, because most of the time you're just going to add at the end of an array. Uh, so yeah. Uh, well, push. I mean push. Push is adding to the at the end of the array. Just a minute. Okay, so now that we have discussed uh, arrays, let's do something a little bit more fun. I'm going to copy this, replace everything. First project, arrays. And what I'm going to do now is do something cool. Div ID is output. Well, okay, not div. What I'm going to do is pre. So why did I use this? Okay, let's first see what pre does. So let's type something in text, text, text. So pre is a uh, uh, pre is is an HTML5 element or an HTML element, and it pre stands for pre-formatted. It's pre-formatted text. It's often in monospace, like I don't know what monospace fonts there are at the moment, but it's a monospace font, which means every character is of equal length. Um, this, for example, is a monospace font. So why do I use pre-formatted text? Well, I'm going to try and expand this one with both arrays, as well as a visual output instead of a console log. So let's do const values is this, and let's replace everything here. So here's not everything, every console log with values push, and again values push. And let's save it, and we see nothing. That's okay. If we need to do console log values, we can see the entirety of FizzBuzz here. So we have 1, 2, 3, yeah. So how do we improve this? Well, let's first turn this into a string. And how do we do this? Const text is values join. And let's join it with an empty string first to see what it does. And if we do text, we can see that every element is joined together in one string, as one string, without spaces in between. This is normal. If we add a space, then we get spaces. We can also use the new line character. So now we can get 1, 2, fizz, 4, buzz, blah blah blah. Now, that's nice, but we want to see it here and not in the console, and that's not a problem. So first, let's see here. Let's take a look here. We see pre and an ID for output. We okay. Let's see. What we can do now is select this pre with this ID. Now, how do we do this? This is a bit of a basic DOM thing. So let's do const and then output is document. We'll target the entire document and do get element by ID. And what ID do we use? Output. Next, what we can do with output is output text content is text. And now we can see 1, 2, fizz, 4, buzz, blah, 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 blah. And we can change the max to 30 or 100. And it'll generate fizz buzz until how many times we want it to. So this is how we can make a basic fizz buzz application. So what have we learned? We've learned how arrays work, how to push to an array, and how to actually display variables to not just the console, but also to an element on the HTML DOM. So yeah. I don't think there are a lot of questions here. Let's see, what can we do from here? Okay, I'll try to download the VOD and upload it somewhere, maybe on my main channel, maybe on my other channel. Yeah, I might make a VOD channel for myself. But yeah, this is basically a small basis for HTML, not HTML, JavaScript. So we've learned how to use variables, how to use, yeah, what the difference is between const and let. We've learned about if blocks, for blocks, concatenation, what else, arrays, and yeah, basically we've learned yeah, we've basically learned to make a simple FizzBuzz application. Now, I do want to make it a bit more interesting. First, okay, so what I first want to do is make it so that we can actually well, we want to, what do we want to do? Okay, let's get a new file, and let's discuss functions. Control V, functions, and let's for now remove this. So what do we want to do? Let's show the preview. So what is a function? A function is basically a bit of code that you can reuse. So let's make a function. Okay, let's copy some code. We copy the output here so that we don't have to constantly look for the output. We also do the console clear. function, and let's call this function hello world. And what hello world does is use output text content is hello world. Okay, so let's save it. Then, well, we don't exactly see anything. Well, that's because we need to actually execute this function. So let's do hello world, and now when it gets run, we can see hello world here. So basically, a function allows us to execute chunks of code uh, whenever we want. So how can we expand it? Well, let's do make a button first. Button ID is submit. Type is button, and let's call it submit div. So if we click on it, nothing happens. So what we can do is on click is, and then hello world. Let's save it, and if we click on submit, it runs hello world. So what can we do with this? Well, let's go back here and copy everything from here and put it in here. So what you can see is I use tabs to indent everything. Indentation isn't mandatory, but it makes code a lot more cleaner. So let's do this. Let's submit this, and okay, something doesn't happen, and that's right, because I need to do output text content. Let's save it and submit, and it actually posts executes hello world. Now well, what we can see is that this function is quite big, and we need to call this FizzBuzz. So how can we actually shorten it? Well, first let's just do output FizzBuzz, output FizzBuzz, and let's do is FizzBuzz value, get FizzBuzz value, and let's call this one, let's do this. Okay, so what you notice is if we're going to run this, it's going to fail. Why? Because I isn't defined anywhere. So what we want to do is values push get FizzBuzz value, and then I. But if we run this, it does nothing. So first, okay, what's the first problem? Let's do a console log I. All right, of course it doesn't work because we need to submit it, and we already get one error. Let's make this console window bigger. Right. So if I move this up a bit. Okay, so let's make it a bit smaller again. So I isn't defined. That's right. I here isn't defined. So what we've done here is we added an argument I. So that argument needs to be entered somewhere here. So if I use edit here, what we needed to do with a function is we need to add a parameter. So in this case it's I. We can also call it number, or num or number. I just use num just in case number is a reserved word. Replace the i's. So if we now use submit, values isn't defined. Okay, where is it? Oh, here. So yeah, so what we can do is move this values to here, but we want to just get one number value. So what we can do is first we'll remove this, and if we submit it, there's no problem, but we still need to do something with the output. We want this to return a value. And how do we return a value? By using the keyword return. And we can also do return here. But what we'll do is remove the else block because we don't need it. No. If we save it, we submit it, we'll get the right value. So we've split the code into two separate files. So let's check something else. So let's do console log get this buzz value 10, and we can see that it's buzz. So if we remove it, we get undefined. Why do we get undefined? 0 undefined, 0 undefined. That's a weird thing. Well, it's not really weird. If you do console log and num, then number is undefined. So what if we want number to be a value like 1 when it's not defined? Well, we can do that. We can use this, or 15 even. So console log num. Yeah. So right now we can see that because num is 15, the output is FizzBuzz. So we can set a default value for this parameter. Remember, optional values. This is an optional value. This is an optional parameter or optional arguments. Optional arguments always go at the end of a function. Mandatory or required values always go first. Otherwise, it's going to be a huge problem for JavaScript and other programming languages. So yeah, there's that. But what do we want to do with this? Well, let's do an input block. Type is number, I believe. Numeric. I forgot what it was. Yes, number. Let's give it an ID called steps. And when we do output FizzBuzz, we'll add const steps is document get element by ID steps. So now we have a reference to this element, and now we can replace this max is 15 with steps dot uh, text content. No, not text content, because that's we need value. We need a value of this So we also need the default values. So does default value exist? No, it doesn't exist actually. So value is 15. Let's save it. If we press submit, we get 15 items, 20. You get 5 more. We go back to 13. So we can see that this also works. Okay. So this is basically how it works. So we now have an input field, a submit button, and a FizzBuzz output. But okay, so if we now so sometimes you are unable to add an on-click on your website or whatever. It might be a content management system that doesn't allow you to add JavaScript inside an element, or you just don't want security risks with this, and that's why you separate everything JavaScript from your DOM. So let's remove this line. This is something I might get more in depth with in a future stream. So let's now reference the submit element. There is a better way to handle submit elements, but I'll first do it like this. So we have submit, and what we do next is submit dot add event listener. So what add event listener does is it listens to certain events. In this case, we want it to listen to the click event, and then we want it to execute a function. In this case, output FizzBuzz. Now, if we save it, we click on submit, it still works. So what we've seen here now is basically we've created an input form where we can define the amount of steps, submit it, and we'll get the results of FizzBuzz. But like I said, there's one better way to handle forms, and it's something you might need in in the future when you're doing front-end development, or maybe even a full stack. So let's turn this div into a form element. So normally a form element has an action and whatever, but we are going to skip that action part. Let's Control X, add ID here. And instead of click, we use submit. So if we save and we click on submit now, nothing happens, right? Or does nothing happen? Well, nothing does seem to happen. If we do submit, we can briefly see something happening, but the reason why it flashes is because it reloads this page. It submits your it submits your form to this page, basically redirecting you to that page, acting like a link. So how can we prevent it from happening? Well, first let's add another parameter called event. Most people shorten it by E, so let's also shorten it by E. And then we do E dot prevent default. What it does is it prevents the default behavior of whatever element you're interacting with. So if we do submit now, it submits the form again. Yeah, and just to show you I don't know if I can show it, but okay, let's see. Steps, add event listener, input maybe, and then function e prevent default. Okay, this works still if I do change. Okay. There is a chance that some things will completely prevent your form from being interacted with. Doesn't happen often. Okay, so for example, if you want to submit a form, go to a page, but you also want to do something else with the form while it's submitting, or before it's submitting, which doesn't happen often, then you can leave prevent default out. In this case, we add prevent default because we want to prevent the default behavior, but there are edge cases where you don't need to prevent the default behavior. So how can we improve it? Well, there is one way we can improve it. Functions. Okay, let's see how we can explain it the best way possible. So no, I think I'll leave it for another stream. Because the thing is, that other thing actually requires you to know something about objects. So yeah, that's going to be for another time. So I think I'll be wrapping it up for now. So let's go to the ending screen. For those who are still watching, I thank you for giving me attention. I'll be trying to post this VOD uh, somewhere on a separate YouTube channel so that it can still be watched. Um, I'm going to look in, I'm going to take a look. Who can I raid? Um, okay, Ronan is still streaming. Oh crap. Uh, so Ronan is streaming. Vishy is streaming. A lot of people are streaming. And is there someone I haven't rated? Yeah, I think I'll be sending you guys to Vishy. Vishy is mostly a deceive streamer, or um, I don't know if she does play other games. It's mainly Deceive Inc. She also sometimes plays Zapekist, especially when she plays with other streamers like Maki or Ronan. Strange that Maki isn't live, but still. Um, so let's raid Vishy. And here we go. So anyway, thanks for watching, and I hope to see you guys next time. Oh, also before I go, right now, uh, the Game Maker's Toolkit is running a game jam. Uh, game jam. I'll quickly link it in the description. Um, it's running right now, so if you wanna join in on the game jam, uh, you should. It's I don't know what the team right now is. It's roles reversed. Okay, so anyway, thanks for watching, and I hope to see you guys another time.